Aloha friends! Welcome to my channel, Bedtime Story for You, where I read bedtime stories on the public domain and you can relax or drift off to sleep. Tonight we are continuing on our adventure with the third voyage of Sinbad the Sailor. Having rested for a space in Baghdad, where I lived surrounded by every happiness and delight, I began to experience that restless desire for travel and commerce which had drawn me forth in my former voyages. When the desire grew so great that I could no longer withstand it, I set out with a large stock of merchandise and arrived at the city of El Basra, where I took up on a ship together with a goodly company of merchants and others of high standing and repute. For many days we sailed outwards, buying and selling among the islands, until one day, while we were in the midst of the ocean, a storm descended upon us and blew the ship out of its course. The wind continued from one quarter with great violence, and for a day and night we were hurled before it. When morning came, it abated, and the master of the ship looked forth on every hand to ascertain where we were. Suddenly he uttered a loud cry and plucked his beard. "God preserve us," he said. "The gale hath driven us to an evil fate. See, yonder is the mountain of apes. None hath ever come near it and escaped it." We looked and beheld a high mountain on an island, and while we were gazing at it and wondering where lay the danger at so great a distance, behold, the sea around us was swarming with apes which had swum out from the island. They were hideous black beasts, not of large size, but of malignant aspect, and so great was their number that we were powerless to stand against them. They climbed up the sides of the ship and seized upon the ropes, which they severed with their sharp teeth, so that the sails were powerless, and the vessel drifted with tide and wind to the shore. There we were seized by the apes and set on the land, after which they returned to the ship and bent fresh ropes and set sails, and departed over the sea we knew not whither. But we ceased to wonder at the manner of their going, for we were in a desperate plight, since all sailors feared the mountain of apes, and no ship would ever approach the island to rescue us. In our wanderings through the island, eating of its fruits and drinking of its streams, we came at length to an open space in which stood a house of gigantic size. The walls and the folding doors of ebony were very lofty, and when we walked into an immense apartment, for the doors were open, we found everything within it of a corresponding size. The cooking utensils were large enough to cook a whole ox, and on the couch at the upper end 100 men might sit with comfort. But no occupant could we find, so we seated ourselves and rested for a while, and then we slept. It was about sunset when we were awakened suddenly by a loud noise and a trembling of the earth, and lo, we beheld coming from the further end of the apartment a gigantic being in the shape of a man. His skin was black, and his eyes blazed like fire. 2 gleaming tusks protruded from his great mouth. His enormous ears drooped to his shoulders, and his nails were like the sharp claws of a beast of prey. We were stricken with great fear at the approach of this frightful being, so that we could neither move nor cry out, while he advanced to the couch and disposed his huge limbs thereon. Then, on turning his head, he caught sight of us, and rose and came towards us. As I was nearest to his hand, he seized me, and taking me from the ground, turned me over and over in his palm, feeling my limbs to see if they were fat. By the grace of God, whose name be exalted, I was lean and wasted with fatigue and affliction. So he set me down and seized another, whom he turned over and over, felt in the same manner. He too was lean, and he let him go. But he took one after another until he came to the master of the ship, a big fat man. With him he was satisfied. Then, seeing what he was about to do, we hid our eyes and did not look again until the ogre, having cooked and eaten our master, threw his bones upon a heap of others on one side of the apartment. Afterwards he arose and laid himself down upon the couch and slept, and his snoring was like the roll of thunder. We crept forth from that house in terror, feeling that it was happier to be killed by apes or drowned in the sea than to be roasted on live coals, a terrible death for a man. We then considered means of hiding or escaping from the place, but there was no place to hide, and the ship, our only way of escape, was gone. While we were lamenting, a spell seemed to be cast over us, so that our very excess of fear drew us back to the ogre's house, wherein we sat as before and slept. Again we were awakened by the thunder of the ogre's approach, and again he came and selected one of our number. When having eaten, he slept upon the couch. We conversed together, thinking to find some way of escape. One said, by Allah, let us kill him," and he proposed a plan. "Listen, O my brothers," I said, on hearing this. If we seek to kill him, let us first prepare some rafts on which to escape, for we may fail our purpose, and on these rafts we can at worst be drowned, which is better than being roasted. They answered me, "Thou art right." So we set up to work and gathered stout pieces of wood and carried them to the seashore, where we constructed rafts and stowed food upon them in readiness for our hasty departure. Then we returned to the giant's house to carry out our plan. The sound of his snoring told us he still slept, so we took 2 sharp pointing iron spits and heated the points red hot in the fire. Then we approached him cautiously, and at a given signal thrust the red hot points one into each of his eyes, and bore upon the spits with our combined weight. He arose with a mighty roar, and we fled right and left. For his sight being destroyed, we feared his blind rage. He searched for us, but not finding us, he groped for the door, and went forth uttering loud cries which shook the earth. In great haste, and lashed by mortal fear, we gained the seashore and launched the rafts, but scarcely had we gained the water when we saw the ogre approaching, led by a female more gigantic and more hideous than him. We swam out, pushing the rafts before us, but they hurled great rocks after us, and many of our number were killed. 3 alone, including myself, escaped, and after much stress and peril reached another island. We had gained at length what seemed to us a space of safety, high and dry above the wave, and far from the ogre's domain, and there when the night came on we slept, but only to awaken to fresh terrors. Lo! In the act of coiling round us was a serpent of enormous size, its folds contracting and its head raised to strike. At sight of this, another and myself, who were more nimble than our companion, sprang clear of the serpent's embrace, while he seized in his huge jaws and slowly swallowed with a horrible crackling of bones our companion. We mourned our companion and went thenceforth in fear for ourselves. Dreading to sleep again on the ground, we climbed a high tree, and binding ourselves each in a safe position with our turbans, we slept fitfully. But alas, God hath given to all serpents the wisdom of the evil one. That night the serpent mounted the tree, and seizing my companion, proceeded to swallow him, while I looked on in helpless fear. Then in descending the tree, it coiled its vast bulk around the trunk, and I heard my companion's bones crack within its paunch. When morning had come, I descended from the tree, feeling that my safest course was to drown myself in the waves, for where else could I hide that the serpent could not find me? But life is sweet, and I pondered long upon a cunning plan to protect myself. And returning to the seashore, I selected some pieces of wood from the raft and took them to a dry place. Towards evening, when I had eaten of the fruits of the island and drunk of its streams, I bound a long piece of wood crosswise upon the soles of my feet, and another crosswise upon my head. I secured a wide flat piece to my right side, another to my left side, and another to the front of my body. And there, having thrust my arms under the side pieces, I lay encased. And as the evening wore on, the serpent saw me and drew near, but it could not swallow me because of the pieces of wood. All through the night it tried to come at me, tempting in all ways to effect its purpose. But in every way it failed, while I lay like a dead man, gazing in speechless horror at the terrible creature. And it ceased not in its efforts to engulf me till morning broke, when it went its way, consumed with rage and vexation. Then I freed myself from the pieces of wood and arose, trembling in every limb, but thanking God for my deliverance. For look you, I was sorely tried by what I had endured from that serpent. Not many hours later, I had the good fortune to espy a ship far out upon the sea, and as I was making as if to pass a headland of the island somewhat closely, I ran with all speed and established myself on the furthest point. There I waved my unfolded turban to attract the notice of those on the vessel. At last they saw me, and came and took me on board. They listened to my story with great astonishment, and congratulated me on my escape. Then they gave me clean raiment, and set food and drink before me, so that I was revived and comforted. And as we proceeded on our way, I was emboldened to look back on all I had suffered as nothing more than a terrible dream. In the course of our journey, we came to an island where the sandalwood grows, and where I landed with the other merchants. But they had goods to sell, while I, alas, had none. Then, strange to relate, the same kind Providence that had befriended me on my first voyage was at my service once more, and in the same guise. The master of the ship, seeing me without merchandise, came to me, and taking compassion upon my poor condition, told me of some goods in the hold which belonged to a man whom they had lost during the voyage. He offered me these goods to sell upon the island, so that when an account had been rendered to the owner's family in Baghdad, there would be recompense for my trouble and service. I thanked him gladly for this, and he ordered the goods to be brought up and landed on the island. And lo, when I saw the bales, I knew them, and showed how they were marked with the name of Sinbad the Sailor. Then, seeing that they were perplexed, I shouted in my excitement, "Do you not hear me? I am Sinbad the Sailor, and these are my goods." While some believed and others doubted, I related my story from the time I had awakened upon the island to find myself alone. And when I mentioned the Valley of Diamonds, a merchant came forward and confirmed my words, for it was he whose slaughtered beast had helped me to safety. "Hear me, ye doubters," he said. "When I related this very thing to you, you believed me not. But see, this is the man I spoke of, and now you have it independently from his own mouth. Learn from this, O my brothers. Never while living doubt a true tale, because it is marvelous." Then the master asked me what was the distinguishing mark of my goods, and I replied that it was such and such mark, and I also called to his mind some conversation between him and me before the ship left Al-Basra. He was then convinced that I was Sinbad the Sailor, and congratulated me and embraced me, saying that my story was most extraordinary. The remainder of this, my third voyage, was occupied in buying and selling many among the islands on the way to Al-Basra, whence in good time, laden with wealth and rich merchandise, I proceeded to Baghdad to dwell in peace again, surrounded by my family and friends. Here for a season, charmed with every delight, I forgot the perils and horrors I had endured. But the longing for travel and adventure found me out again, impelling me to undertake a fourth voyage. And the events of this more marvelous than those preceding voyages, O Sinbad the landsman, I will narrate to you tomorrow. The fourth voyage of Sinbad the Sailor. Led by the desire to associate with other races and to buy and sell for grain, for the soul is prone to evil, I departed from Baghdad with many precious bales and set sail from El-Basra in a large ship on which a company of other merchants embarked in like fashion. For many days we had a pleasant journey among the islands, and all went well with us until on reaching the wider sea beyond, a mighty wind came up against us. The sea rose in great waves as the tempest increased, and we were in dire peril. More and more violent grew the gale, lashing the sea into fury. The sails were rent, and the masts were blown away. We sprang a leak, and slowly the vessel began to sink. We gave ourselves up for lost, and indeed, when the waves passed over us, and we sank, many perished. But in the seething turmoil, it was my good fortune to be cast against a broad plank, which I seized and held. Others were struggling for life nearby, and I was able to draw some of them to me. Sore buffeted as we were by wind and wave, we mounted that plank and sat astride of it. Thus through a whole day and night we drifted before the gale, now descending into despairing hollows of the sea, and now flung up on the mountain tops of billows. At dawn on the following day the sea cast us like dead men upon an island, where for many hours we lay exhausted. Albeit strength began to return to us again, and we arose feebly and staggered forth into the island. Fruit and herbs there were in abundance, and clear fresh water, so we ate and drank and were revived. That night we slept upon the shore, and in the morning we arose strengthened and invigorated. When we had broken our fast, we set ourselves to explore the island, and had not gone far in this before we came to a great building. As we stood at the door of this, wondering who dwelt within, a party of naked men came out, and without a word seized us and led us into a spacious apartment, where we found ourselves standing before their king. He commanded us to be seated, and they brought us food of a strange kind, such as we had never seen before. My companions ate largely of this, but my stomach revolted at it, and I ate but little, a thing which preserved me from a terrible fate. For as my companions ate, they became mad with a ravenous hunger, and ate more and more. Presently they were given coconut oil to drink, and when they had swallowed it, their eyes rolled in their heads, and they continued to eat in a frenzy horrible to behold. I was consumed with fear at these things, and said within myself, "This is a tribe of magi, and their king is a ghoul." As I observed them attentively, I remembered a story of these people, how they seized on travelers and set this loathsome food before them to eat, and gave them the oil to drink, so that they swell out and eat more and more until they are fattened to an enormous degree, and their minds are rendered like those of idiots. Whereupon in due time they kill and roast them and serve them up as food to their king. And all these things I saw in the days that my companions were fattening. For there were others who had been seized before us, and each day one of these was killed and roasted and set before the king. While I was wasting away with fear and hunger, and it was on this account that they forgot me and left me to die in my own way, my companions had come to be like dull, heavy, stupid beasts of the field, so that they were placed in the care of a beast herd, who led them forth every day to the pasturage. As for myself, as soon as I observed that I was a failure in that I would not fatten, and that none took heed of me, nor marked my coming or my going, I rose in the night and crept away among the trees surrounding the king's dwelling. Then when the morning came, I went forth with a heart of fear, knowing not what fresh terror I should encounter. With my wanderings back and forth, I came about midday to a stretch of green pasture, where I beheld with sorrow my late companions grazing on all fours, and fattening like beasts for the slaughter, while the beast herder sat upon a rock and piped on an oaten reed. I breathed a silent farewell to them as to those I should never see again, and turned sadly away. My heart was cold within me, and my steps were faltering as I wandered on, pausing here and there to gather edible herbs and roots, which for want of something better served to sustain life in my body. Journeying in this way, I came at length to a grove of pepper trees, and there were men at work in it, gathering the berries. Their aspect seemed to me to be peaceable, so I exposed myself, and they approached me and pressed upon me, asking my name and whence I had come. for my aspect excited their curiosity. Then I unfolded to them the tale of the adventures, the perils, and the horrors that had befallen me, and when I had related the sad case of my companions, they wondered greatly at my escape. While they resumed their work, they made me welcome amongst them, and set nutritious food before me, the like of which I had not tasted for many days. I regaled myself on their bounty, and rested, and was content. When they had finished their work at the setting of the sun, they took me with them to the seashore, and I accompanied them in their vessel to an island not far distant, where they brought me to their king. And there before them in his court, at his command, I narrated my adventures since leaving Baghdad, at which his interest was kindled, and he bade me sit with him and eat. And I did so gladly, for my body was thin and meagre, and my vigor was sorely wanting. After that, having shewn my gratitude to the king and offered praise to God for his saving grace, I rose, and with the king's permission went forth into his city. It was a well-conditioned, flourishing place, thronged with buyers and sellers, and there was an abundance of food and rich merchandise. As day followed day, and time drew on, I had cause to rejoice at my arrival in that city, for I found favor with the king, and he magnified me over his people and his great men. Observing the ways of the people, I saw that the horses that they rode were without saddles, whereupon I went in to the king and spoke to him on the matter, describing a saddle and the ease and comfort of it. At this the king desired me to make him one, and placed at my disposal his cleverest carpenters with many tools and instruments. And I sat with the carpenter, instructed him how to proceed, so that the saddle, covered with polished leather and stuffed with teased wood, was soon complete. I attached stirrup straps and girths, and showed the blacksmith how to fashion the stirrups. Then, with the aid of costly fringes and trappings, the work was complete. Full of satisfaction, I sent for one of the king's finest horses, saddled and bridled him, and led him before his majesty. He was greatly pleased at the sight of what I had done, and when he had mounted the horse and sat on the saddle, he was overjoyed at the ease and pleasure of it, and bestowed upon me a large reward. When the king's chief officials and the grandees of his court saw the saddle which I had made, they each and all desired me to make others like it. Then with the carpenter and the blacksmith I employed many days in the construction of numerous saddles, and for these I received much gold, and rose to an assured position in the land. The high rank and honor which the king had bestowed upon me had but half expressed his heart towards me. I was yet to learn that he had a further favor in store. One day, while I was sitting at his right hand discussing affairs of state, he said to me, "O my son, seeing thou hast now become as one of us, and we cannot part with thee, I desire that thou give ear to a matter which I have planned, and which will bind thee more closely to us." And I answered him, "For thy great kindness to me, O king, I am now and henceforth thy faithful servant. What dost thou desire me to do?" And he looked at me intently and said, "I would marry thee to a woman of high rank among us, one possessed of great beauty and wealth, so that thou mayest continue to dwell with us in pleasure and comfort, and with a good heart. Thus shalt thou advantage greatly, and receive every good thing at my hands. Wherefore refuse me not, nor oppose my wish." I remained silent, for I was overwhelmed by his proposal, and the stress of bashfulness it brought to my face. Seeing this, he rallied me and said, "Art thou dumb? Is not thy heart with us?" Then of a sudden I replied, "O king, thy words took away my breath. As thou commandest, so I obey." Pleased at my compliance, the king immediately ordered his officials to bring the lady and the witnesses, and forthwith I was married to her with the king's blessing and the acclamation of all his court. She was of surpassing loveliness, and she brought me a dowry of abundant wealth and possessions. And to this the king added a magnificent house with servants and slaves, and assigned me a handsome salary. And I lived in ease and comfort, our days being full of delights. Gone was all thought of perils and hardships I had endured, and gone was the fear of adversities in store. But there is no strength nor power but in God, and he orders the fates of men as he will. On an evil day, a great fear suddenly came to me by reason of a thing which I will make known unto you. A companion of mine suffered a bereavement in that his wife died. Whereupon I went to him and mourned with him, saying, Take heart, O brother, God will fill her place to thee with one far better. But he continued to weep, saying, Alas, how can I marry another when this very day I depart this life? Nay, I said, that is not within reason, for thou art in good health and not likely to die. He then raised his head and dried his tears and said to me very slowly, Hear me, O brother. Knowest thou not that today they will bury my wife, and that they will bury me also in the same tomb with her? For such is our custom. When husband or wife is buried, the other must be buried also, so that neither may continue to enjoy life alone. By Allah, I said, smiting palm on palm, this custom is wholly vile, and it touches me so closely. Then he continued to discuss this matter. There came others who condoled with my companion, grieving not only for the loss of his wife, but also that they should never see him more. And later in the day came yet others, bearing a plank, and on this they laid the woman and carried her forth, prepared for burial on the plank of wood, with all her jewels and raiment and wealth, and the husband went with them. Through sympathy with my companion and to bid him a last farewell, I followed this funeral procession till it halted in a distant spot on the seashore. There a great stone was lifted, a vault exposed. Into this they threw the body of the woman, and then by means of a stout cord they lowered the husband gently till he rested by her side. A pitcher of water and 7 cakes were then let down to him, and when he had freed himself from the cord, they drew it up and closed the sepulchre and went their ways. By Allah, said I within myself as I smote myself on my breast, this manner of death is the worst of all. And on my return I went in to the king with grief and fear gnawing at my heart. O king, I said, tell me why this is, that ye bury the living with the dead. Said he, O my son, it is the custom of our country, and has descended to us from our ancestors. Husband and wife are one, in death as in life. And I answered him with a question that concerned me nearly. O my lord, I said, and the stranger that sojourneth with thee, if his wife die, do you treat him in the like manner? Yea, he replied, in like manner, even as thou hast seen. Then I departed from him in grief and mourning, lest I should perchance be bereft of my wife. In vain I did say to myself, Be comforted, maybe thou wilt die before her. None knoweth. In vain did I give myself up to my manifold occupations. The fear was not to be dispelled. And within a short time, what I had feared came to pass. My wife was stricken with a fever, and when I had reason to hope she would recover, she suddenly relapsed and died. My grief at this was overwhelming, but as if to add to it, there came many to condole with me on her death, and to mingle their tears with mine, for that I should soon be departing this life. The king himself came and commiserated with me on my most unhappy fate, and said, There is no strength nor power in any but God. Farewell, O my son. And they prepared my wife for burial, arraying her in her richest garments and her finest jewels. When they carried her to the burial place and cast her down into the pit, then all my companions pressed upon me to bid me farewell. My gorge rose, and I cried out upon them that their custom was vile. Loudly I spoke my bitter mind on the abominable nature of this thing. They would not listen, but took me by force and lowered me into the pit, together with the 7 cakes and the pitcher of water. And when I had reached the floor of a vast cavern, they called down to me, Untie the ropes that we may draw them up. I answered, Draw me up with them. Nay, nay, they replied, we do but follow our custom. To the ravens with you and your custom, I retorted, for I had no stomach for this proceeding. Then, as I steadily refused to loose the ropes, they at last drew them down upon me, and having closed the mouth of the pit, went their way. Now was I in worse plight than I had ever been. On that cavern floor there were the bodies and bleached bones of those that had died natural death, cheek by jowl, with those who had perished in the fulfillment of this abominable custom, and I said to myself, better to remain single and live than to marry and be buried alive. Nevertheless, knowing not night from day, I kept myself from death by eating sparingly of the cakes and drinking some of the water, for I was in no mood to die in so vile a manner after having come through great perils by mountain and sea. At length, when I had eaten all the cakes and drunk all the water, and hunger and thirst began to cry out within me, I rose and wandered to and fro in the cavern, stumbling and falling over dead bodies, and biting the dust of bones that had crumbled long since. By dint of much groping in the dark, I at length found the wall of the cavern, and selecting therein a cavity free from bones and corpses, I stretched myself and slept. I was awakened later, as if by hunger and thirst, knocking at the door, and while I sat in gloom, thinking of the plenty in Baghdad, fool that I was to leave it, I heard a sudden noise. Looking forth from my cavity, I saw that the stone had been removed from the opening of the cavern, and a dead body was being lowered. It was the body of a man. After him was let down the living body of his wife. She was weeping and wailing for him and for herself. Then the mouth of the cavern was closed again, and all was dark and silent save the wailing of the woman echoing through the cavern. Alas, she cried, that I should die this lingering death. Had I means to end my life, then would I do it. Would that there were one here to slay me. When I heard this, I remembered that I had never been able to resist the pleading of a woman. So I rose, and taking a stout leg bone in my hand, I slew her according to her desire, and I took her 7 cakes and the pitcher of water which she would no longer need. And retiring to my cavity, I ate and drank. This thing occurred many times during my sojourn in that cavern, for a number of married men and women chanced to die, and though they did not always cry out for me to slay them, I knew their prayer beforehand and answered it speedily. Thus the cakes and the water bequeathed to me stayed my spirit, and I continued to live. Time passed slowly, but yet it passed. I had no other means of measuring it except to call an hour a day and a day a year, and I was weary to death of it all when an unwonted thing occurred. I was awakened suddenly from sleep by a noise at the far end of the cavern. Then I heard footsteps as of some beast. I rose, and arming myself with a stout bone, advanced upon the intruder, but it heard me and fled from me. I could not come at it. Yet as I followed its footsteps, I saw its form darken a pin spot of daylight at the end of the crevice of the cavern. This gave me a glimmer of hope,